Hi.
Hey.
Did you press record?
No.
Oh, it must be recording automatically. Oh, I have my little thing up there. Let me rename. And did I say I was coming in at 3:30? Sorry.
It's 3:40. I was just
Oh.
happy just to be prepared.
I understand. I had to go outside for a few minutes today.
Yeah.
So that's well, thanks for helping. I don't think we got any or many of the presentations. Is that correct?
Yeah, I didn't see any.
Okay. Well, that's good. Nothing stressful about that.
Yeah. That's okay.
There's so many people on this. So it'll be good. Hopefully I'll have them in the correct order. I wasn't taking close notes on that yesterday, but
I think I read
all
it.
right. Oh yeah, what do you have?
Maybe I didn't. Never mind, I can't read my Joe, then Jim,
Yep.
then Brian, then I wrote the word C something. Michael.
Candace.
Okay, yes.
And then Mike. Okay. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Jim.
Hello. How are you?
Thank you for joining so early.
Well.
And for jumping in too. I suppose that's a new aspect of this. I'm also jumping in. Cheryl is not joining us today. She wasn't feeling well, so she asked if we could step up. So
okay,
here we go. I may or may not have 4 index cards pasted above my computer.
Understood. I was wondering if I could use just an extra minute of your time just to get your input on whether or not this is going to work.
Sure.
Counting on that it will. So, may I share screen and see if I can share this window?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chelsea Hahn. I'm with the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Welcome to today's webinar, the 5th and final presentation of the Connecticut Compost Conference webinar series. We have a great lineup today, including Joe Wedeman, Jim Hyde, Brian Jaros, Dr. Candace Benyay, and Mike Kerrigan, and our moderator is Cynthia Rabowitz. And I want to take a moment to, let's see if I can move the slides forward here. This is our 5th and final series. If you haven't had a chance to watch the previous, they're all wonderful and I recommend them. I want to take a moment here to thank our sponsors and partners who were key in the success of this series, which takes the place of the in-person conference that had been scheduled this past March. So today's program, everyone will be muted. Please mute your audio and video if you're not presenting. And the question and answer session will take place at the very end after all the presentations, except for if there's clarification questions, which Cynthia can ask. Today's being recorded, and at the end, you will receive an evaluation. And the previous 4 webinars are found on these 2 sites. And I'm going to read our disclaimer. DEEP is hosting the Connecticut Compost webinar series in part as professional development for municipal recycling leaders. Presentations do not constitute DEEP policy. Mention of trade names or commercial products does not constitute endorsement or recommendation of use. Links to non-DEEP websites do not imply any official DEEP endorsement of or a responsibility for the opinions, ideas, data, or products presented at those locations or guarantee the validity of the information provided. Links to non-DEEP servers are provided solely as a pointer to information that might be useful to DEEP staff and the public. So with that, Cynthia, you can take it away. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Chelsea. Welcome, everybody. I'm Cynthia Rabinowitz, Executive Director of the Northwest Conservation District. If you are participating today for the first time, the previous sessions will probably also be of interest to you, and all the sessions were recorded, as is this one going to be recorded. And some of the previous ones are already available on the CT RC&D website that you can visit and at any time. So today's program will start with a series of short presentations followed by our main speaker. And as Chelsea said, after that, we'll have a question and answer period, and I will present the questions that have come in on the chat. If you wish your questions to be directed to a specific speaker, please indicate that in your chat message. Lastly, please look for an email in the next day or so with a short survey about the webinar. It's very helpful for the committee to read the feedback from participants for future event planning purposes. Again, this webinar is being recorded. Our first speaker this afternoon is Joe Wetterman. Joe is a senior sanitary engineer with the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. He has 33 years of experience preventing and remediating pollution from existing and proposed livestock operations on farms and commercial composting facilities. Joe was instrumental in helping Whimsybrook Farm with its new compost operation, allowing it to become a horse farm of environmental distinction. We'll be hearing from another speaker later who represents Whimsybrook Farm, Dr. Beignet. Joe also addresses large-scale subsurface sewage disposal systems and associated wastewater treatment plants. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you for that introduction. So, to be approved by DEP as an on-farm composting facility, the composting must be an integral part of the farming operation. So what is an integral part of the farming operation? It could be composting mortalities from livestock operation or slaughter waste from free-range chickens that are grown on the farm. It could be composting horse manure or swine or poultry manure from a farm that has little or no cropland that needs to compost the manure to make a more marketable product to move it off-site. It could be composting manure that's generated off-site, bringing horse manure onto your farm to compost it to add nutrients or organic matter to your cropland. It could be composting of leaves, yard waste, food waste, to create a mulch for vegetable crops or for additional nutrients or for soil health. These are examples of enabling the farmer to be able to function and consider and are considered integral parts of the farming operation. If you're bringing in off-site materials onto the farm, you need to use at least 50% of the composted material on the farm. If you're selling more than 50%, then you're really a commercial composting operation and you're not eligible under the on-farm composting approval. Just composting on the farm doesn't make composting an integral part of the farming operation. So if the composting that you're proposing is not an integral part of the farming operation, there are other permitting pathways that are not part of this presentation today, but you can contact me and I'll help you navigate the permitting process. So if the composting is an integral part of the farming operation, you need to develop a comprehensive nutrient management plan. The plan is going to outline the best management practices to minimize the transfer of pollutants and protect the waters of the state. The plan is going to document the operation, maintenance, management of the composting facility, and it's going to address the nutrient balance of the compost operation from source materials to uses. As stressed by previous speakers, the site selection is critical for a successful composting operation. You need to evaluate the distance to neighbors, property lines, water courses, private and public wells. These setbacks are not regulations, but for planning purposes. The site selection, design criteria, and design principles presented by previous speakers in this webinar series are what needs to be documented in the comprehensive nutrient management plan. The CNMP tells a story. Why is it a good site for composting? How composting will take place, how odors will be addressed, how leachate and runoff are addressed, what the finished product will be, and how the site is managed. The CNMP includes a description of the site location, property size, property ownership, property boundaries, location maps, and a narrative of what's being proposed. A history of the site. Was it cropland? Was it forest? Was it an old silage bunker? The plan is going to document the current site conditions, what the soils are, the depths to groundwater and bedrock, groundwater and surface water classifications. It's going to identify the watershed that you're in and whether or not it's a drinking water supply watershed. It's going to include maps, your soils maps, USGS topo, and include location of wells, wetlands, and surface waters. The plan identifies source materials, horse manure, food waste, wood chips, whatever you're bringing in, and quantities of each. Large volumes of cow manure or poultry manure may need to be composted under cover. It also identifies what the nutrient content of different source materials are. The shape and size of windrows in any composting structures, the target carbon-nitrogen ratio, the target moisture content, mix ratios, methods of mixing, what equipment is being used, what the turning schedule would be, temperature monitoring, how you're going to control odors and area requirements. It needs to include an aerial photo or a drawing depicting the layout of the functional areas of the site, the the location for loading, unloading, mixing, windrows, curing, any structures. It's going to identify what best management practices are being used to minimize runoff, such as clean water diversions, grass filters, or covers. It's going to describe what the finished product is, how it's going to be used, if it's for land application on the farm, how many acres it will be applied to, what crops will be grown, and what the application rate would be. You'll need to test the soil to determine what the application rate should be, and you also need to sample the compost to know what the nutrient content is for land application rates, or if you're selling in bulk, to provide end users with the nutrient content. The CNMP needs to be developed by a qualified professional. Plans in the past have been developed by the Natural Resource and Conservation Service, technical service providers, engineers, and Yukon Extension. The Natural Resource and Conservation Service can develop CNMPs for on-farm composting if the farm qualifies for their programs. If you go to the Connecticut NRCS website, you can find your local office, contact them to determine if you qualify for their programs and determine if you want to work with NRCS. Also on the NRCS website is a list of technical service providers. They're certified conservation planners. The TSPs can work within NRCS programs or can work independent of NRCS. It's a good idea to have a deep representative out to the proposed site early in the process to identify any concerns. We want to be familiar with the site so we can address questions from the public. All sites are different. Each proposal is unique. We need to evaluate the environmental impact and determine what are appropriate BMPs. Under the DEP approval, there's record keeping that's required. This is a copy of the annual report you will see with the approval. It also comes with instructions, but you'll only receive that one copy, so when you submit your annual report, you need to make a copy of that. You're going to be reporting the types of materials, the source of materials, and the quantities of each. So what are some of the problems I've seen? This is a compost pile that's located in the drainage way from a road. Run-on, run-off, leachate are difficult to control. It impacted a down-gradient surface water. Choosing the right site is critical for your composting operation. Land application of food waste not fully composted. If it looks bad, the perception, as stated previously, is it smells bad. Contaminants in food waste being land applied. Trash, glass, plastic bags, whatever comes in contaminants in your source materials, if they end up being land applied, draws unwanted attention and complaints. And odors are going to happen. You have to have a plan to address them, and you have to be able to identify what's creating the odors. Not having a plan or not following a plan creates odors, contaminated runoff, leachate, and the inability to compost and produce a good product. If you're considering on-farm composting, contact me so we can discuss your project. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And just a reminder to stop sharing your screen. Perfect.
So while Joe is doing that, I will introduce our next speaker, who is Jim Hyde. Jim is a state agronomist for Connecticut with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, known as NRCS. Jim specializes in soil nutrient management, and manure management planning on animal farms around Connecticut. In addition, Jim works on soil health, soil erosion, cover crops, crop systems, and grazing systems. Over the course of farm visits, he's had a chance to talk with farm owners about their compost systems and planned use of the compost. Today, Jim is going to describe one of the systems he's had an opportunity to learn about. This case study is especially interesting because this farm is like many across Connecticut, a beautiful horse farm that needed a plan for manure management. Thank you, Jim.
Excellent. Thank you, Cynthia. And thank you, everyone, for this opportunity. This opportunity came up fairly quickly. We've been working on this compost series for quite a while now, where it has started out as being an in-person conference like we used to do so long ago, before it got switched over to this webinar series. And one of the people that was very interested in having present their case was a small horse farm in central Connecticut, who had just a handful of horses, 6 horses, but was certainly in need of having some place to manage the manures. There was concern for water, some surface water that was nearby and needed protection. So this person has done a really neat job of managing their manure, looking at all different aspects. And so I had an opportunity to visit the farm just a few days ago, and threw a very cold splash water at him, said, "Hey, we've got this opportunity coming up. Would you be willing to let us video you during this meeting today," just a couple days ago? And he willingly agreed. So I very quickly put this video together. I'd like to try to present this video to you with some simple edits in it. I apologize for the roughness. Be warned that the audio is very low. So when this video starts, I'm going to be very quiet so that you can turn up your audio and hear it. But at the same time, perhaps Cynthia, you and I could keep an eye on the chat. If enough people, let's say 5 people or more, come in and say that I can't hear it, then I'll turn the audio off and I'll just do some commentary through here. So this is a little bit fly by wire here, but I hope it works. I'm very interested in showing this to you all. So now I'm going to keep quiet and let you turn the volume up.
One bag now, but we'll mix probably 2 quarts of water to a bag. Now, see, I'm giving all my secrets away now. But it breaks down to where it's there's still some of the pellet left, and then you get a lot, which is basically sawdust. And once it's in the stall, I mean, it would break down if you left it as a pellet. It's just it takes a lot longer, and this just works a lot better. Our mare here, when she's outside, all her manure is as far away from the stall as she can possibly get it. And when she's in the stall, it will be in an area about that big. And she keeps it very compact. And the way it's designed is we put a little bit of crushed stone down for a base. And then the mats they look like air mattresses, but they're filled with ground power. It's a company out of Canada that does it. Right now we have 6 horses, and this is the active bay, the material that's coming in right now.
And no water is added to this? Occasionally,
if it's really dry, I might take the hose and just put a little bit. But for the most part, we put it in as is.
Okay.
And it maintains, it's not dripping wet, and it's not dry where it's going to blow away in the wind. The moisture content seems to be just about right the way it comes out of the stall.
Perfect. So you've got the blower system up in the back with the pipes going back.
Runs across the back. You can see the 2 floor plenums.
And any problem with the floor getting clogged with material?
No, typically what we do is when we empty out the bin, we'll go through, we'll pop out the boards. They're just 2x6s that are sitting in there with a spacer in between each one. So we'll pop them out, we'll clean them out. It takes probably maybe 20 minutes to clean them. put them back in, and they're good for the next use.
Any problem with the water getting in the troughs?
No, we don't have that. There's nowhere near that much liquid in there. A lot of that is due to the fact we're not using a lot of material, so it dries it out, but we have the balance is there, so it's wet enough where if you squeeze it, it sticks together, but it's not to the point where you've got water running out of it, so we don't have an excess water problem. What we'll do is when this bay is, well, before it's actually full, we'll close the doors, then we'll dump in the rest, and then we'll bring the height to just about the height of the concrete walls. I'll put between 6 and 8 inches of finished material on top. That'll give me an insulation blanket to keep the heat in the pile. We have the blowers on a timer, and we'll maintain about 160 degrees for 2 weeks. And that'll kill all the weed seeds, all the bacteria, everything that's in there. And then the blower will run for another 2 weeks, and the temperature will slowly drop. It usually gets down to about 120 degrees. At that point, we'll shut off the blower, which is where this one's at now. And it's basically, it'll be ready to be used by the time we get to it. 60 days is pretty much the time frame you have for usable compost, as opposed to 6 months to a year if you're just putting it in a static pile outside.
Okay.
Just learning that not to put a lot of hay into it. The raw hay does not break down anywhere near as fast as this material does. So if you put, like if somebody dumped a whole bale of, if we had some moldy hay, if they threw it in there, that tends to just stay in there. It doesn't break down as quickly. It doesn't affect anything other than the fact your finished product is going to have some decomposed hay that's going to be in there. And the other thing was the right ratio of how much bedding material we're using. If you're using too much bedding material, then when you put it in here, it does absorb the excess moisture, and then it does dry the pile out.
Gotcha.
So just playing around with how much bedding material you put into the stalls. You just need enough just to absorb the urine. You don't need 6 inches. It's just wasted material, and it comes in here and it will throw off your carbon nitrogen ratios too, because you're going to have a lot more of the wood chip in there. Other than that, just figuring out how long to run the blower to get the temperature we need and maintain the temperature, not to cool a pile too quickly. And that's it. We've pretty much got that down now, where we know we set the timers. They run for about 4 weeks of introducing air to keep the process going. And then once we get past that 30 days, we shut off the blower, and then it just slowly cools down from there.
Very neat.
All right, so that was it. So some of the things that I just wanted to point out in that video was just that this is a little bit atypical from some of the things that we see on the different horse farms. He's really working to manage the amount of carbon and the amount of material that's going in there. The horse manure as is very compostable. The horse's diet leads to a really good compost. So the additions that you put into the compost definitely makes a difference. He's been working really hard. He had some one-on-one consulting to work to learn how to use the system, to learn what inputs were going in there, to adjust the inputs. He did switch from sawdust bedding over to the pelletized bedding. There was a whole process that went into it. And I guess the point that I would just want to leave you with is that it is a learning process. But once you find that recipe, you can do some pretty neat things. And that's what he's done here. He now has a finished product that he is very happy to put directly onto his pastures. He rests his pastures, so he's got really nice grass growth throughout the area. And then people are clamoring to get this material, and they've been really happy with it. He said the worst complaint that he gets is sometimes that there's an apple that was, a horse apple that was undigested or uncomposted. And but that's the worst complaint that he's gotten so far, which is pretty great. So that's all the information I wanted to share, and so I'll jump off now. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Jim, that was really interesting with the video. Thank you.
Welcome.
Our next speaker is Brian Jarosz. Brian is the president and co-founder of AgriLab Technologies, Inc., which is based in Enosburg Falls, Vermont. AgriLab provides compost, aeration, and heat recovery systems for farms, commercial and municipal composters. AGT works in 6 states providing technical assistance and consulting on composting and watershed protection projects. Brian lives on a small farm in Fairfield, Vermont with his family. Thank you, Brian. It's all yours.
Thank you, Cheryl and Cynthia, and great presentations, Joe and Jim. Thank you, and I'm going to go through a number of slides for projects in the Northeast. I'm going to focus on the Collins farm that we got to work with in Enfield, Connecticut, and another farm in Winchendon, Mass, Catlin Farmstead. I'll go through a number of images relatively quickly and then can get into questions. First farm here, I'm going to move this window out of the way. First farm here is the Collins Powder Hill Farm in Enfield. One of 2 dairy farms left in the town, but they've been in the dairy for over 100 years, also done chickens, and they've also run a compost operation for a number of years. Several years ago in 2017, they got selected by the Connecticut Farm Energy Program to do a compost and heat recovery pilot for both the energy and nutrient and manure management benefits. Amanda Fargo Johnson was very involved in that, and a number of other partners. The biggest thing is this farm was chosen because they had been composting for some time and could potentially get a considerable benefit from the labor. In addition to their own farm manure that they scraped from their barn and barnyard areas, they would also get in some landscape debris from local landscapers or sometimes the towns, but also the bedded manure from the Big E Fairgrounds up in Springfield, Mass. So as part of that, they got some services and equipment to use to implement a project to improve their management. Some images here of Jack Collins and John Collins and some of their other staff actually doing the pad themselves. This design was specifically to focus on a project that a farm could implement themselves. So while we did some engineering in our team of AgriLab Technologies, we didn't hire an outside group to do the physical site work. The farm did quite a bit of it themselves, and our team joined them along with some hired electricians and contractors and rented equipment like the compactor you see in the background. After building up a good gravel working pad for a base to ultimately put the compost and manure, these pipe systems were laid out. The portion on the working pad is perforated, so there's holes in the pipes, which allow us to both pull and push air and vapor through the compost piles and into the equipment that sits back in that shed. The equipment beyond an aeration blower that provides the vacuum or reversing and can push air into the piles also has a heat exchanger and a timer that controls a lot of the valves to open and close which pipes are open, and a heat recovery unit. So that was the thermal energy aspect of this, the renewable energy that was able to, like a solar thermal or geothermal system, capture the heat off of the process. And I'll get more into that later. Some more pictures of how this actually functions. Those pipes are on grade or on the working pad, and they are embedded in with chips right around the pipes to not have it clog up with small particles. And the perforations are on the downward portion of the pipe, so that nothing gets packed above. And if there is any water or condensate in the piles, they can drain out. Here's just another way to view this beyond those images, is again that as a representation of the blower and aeration unit with the different intake pipes in the center of the screen. But it pulls or pushes out of those compost piles. So the vapor pulls through all the way through the system, and then through the heat exchanger in the center of the system, there's a water and glycol mix loop, again, like a solar thermal or geothermal system that circulates through this unit and to the point of heating, which in this case was the milk room in the barn. Jack Collins was unable to join the presentation, but he did get to send me some pictures of their operation this month. So this is what it currently looks like. They've mostly run the system for the winter heating benefit. Sometimes they have enough material to compost year round, but without a lot of the fairs and shows happening this year, they had a little less off-farm material come in to blend with their own barnyard manure. But they have one bay loaded right now, and the picture's helpful because you can see how the other pipes sit for the other 3 batches. And that plume of steam you might be able to make out against the older barn in the background is actually the steam that comes from the center of that compost pile. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the readings that come up on the control panel and touchscreen in the middle of the unit. So it's actually pulling in vapor from that compost pile at 155 degrees. The CFM tracks the flow rates for how quickly we're moving that vapor and air through the system. And then importantly, we're also able to track oxygen levels. If you can make that out, it says 1.8% O2. So at the start of an start of a compost cycle, with all that bacteria and other microbes doing the rapid decomposition, quite a bit of the oxygen is consumed. So you'll see a low oxygen reading, sometimes as low as 1% at the start of the cycle. And then we would run an aeration cycle much longer than the O2 system because of the larger fans and vapor speed and flow. But after a half hour or 45 minutes, we'd like to get up above 10% oxygen level to make sure that we're getting the pile into aerobic conditions. So we can adjust either the length of the aeration cycle as well as the fan speed, how much power from the fan. The other thing you can see on here is the temperature of the water in and out. So the heat exchanger was working well and running 152-degree water back to their milk house, and probably weren't in a washing cycle right now, so they probably didn't have a heavy load on the system, and water was returning at 144 degrees. But this is helpful also for us while we're up in Vermont to train the Collins or other site operators how to use this system. We're able to remotely access this during the startup period and use it as another training and teaching tool to make sure the system's running well and to help them optimize it. So to kind of close the Collins example out, some of the results that we did or found over the first year of operation, some of the biggest benefits were on the labor efficiency. So previously with their turned windrow method of flipping the piles over as many as 15 times over 2 years, we were able to reduce that processing time for where it was ready to sale down to 3 to 6 months. So that allowed them to have more compost on hand for the spring sale season, save a lot of hours on the loader for Jack in particular, and save space and a lot of shuttling back and forth to a secondary site. The project for the funding really focused on energy. So in addition to that diesel savings, there was also heating savings for the use of the heat recovery aspect. So that was specifically the preheating the wash water in the dairy barn, which was done by heating oil, as well as you can see in the picture here, a space heater that was used seasonally to keep the milk room from freezing. Thanks to Jack for sharing that. The next system that I was going to focus on, I use this one because it's both relatively nearby in Winchendon, Massachusetts, and it's also one that came online in 2019. So it's one of the more recent installations we've worked with. Very similar equipment, but the background is they are a dairy farm that also had an on-farm cheese plant, and likewise, as part of their nutrient management, sold compost off the farm. They did not have, they were a purchase feed operation, meaning that they don't do a lot of their own farm work. So they'll buy in feed, but that means they also need to not having a land base, need to export a lot of their manure, and they did that in the form of compost. What they did find is it was very wet often. So even though that they had set up a compost system that worked well at times, periodically due to weather or other reasons, the material would be very wet and it would take a long time to break down. And then when they went to run it through screeners for getting ready for sale, either through bulk or bags, it would be a very slow and frustrating activity. So we were able to bring in our equipment and use the heat instead of heating the wash water or a physical space to run dryers, basically another forced air heated aeration system to dry out their wet product. So I'll run through quickly the images here. This is before. So they did have a nice covered building, which is great for all those runoff protection needs, with aeration fans mounted up on the wall. And they'd load these different bays throughout a building. At the other end of the building, they would have commodity storage for wood chips and sawdust and other materials. Part of what we did was we put in larger aeration pipes to move a higher volume of air and get those oxygen levels up to break down the material more rapidly. So those fans came out and we moved those pipes that were fusion welded up onto those walls, and then into that green building is, like at the Collins, another shed that houses the actual aeration equipment. Some of these pictures are amusing just because the creative spider-like reaches that they all had to be welded in and then moved over to the walls. But we had a great crew to get them together and equipment to mount them up on the wall. That's Jason McCune Sanders, our lead engineer, as the pipes were getting mounted up on the walls. Note that they're insulated as well because we want to keep the vapor as warm as possible from the point of the pile where you get those 150 or more degree temperatures all the way to the heat exchanger. There's the actual aeration unit again. That yellow housing is around the blower motor. And then the intake pipes are at the other ends. The control panel is that little screen on the side, and the heat exchanger is the silver box in the middle. Here's a view of the 4 bays that got converted to using our equipment in that array of pipes that runs into the shed at the far end. And then again, how they actually used it, in addition to speeding up their existing process, the heat all was directed, again, through a water and glycol loop to a secondary heat exchanger, which heated up air. And then that hot air was able to force anywhere from 90 to 140 degree air up through their month-old compost. And then instead of it staying really wet and dense and difficult to run through the screener, which you can also see in the background, it was able to accelerate that drying phase and saved them an enormous amount of time. Just a similar screen view of the vapor coming in, again, tracking the oxygen levels, temperature, flow rates on the vapor side, and the water and flows, water temperatures and flows on the water and glycol side. And again, we can see this remotely and help with the system operation. So the summary here is the biggest impact for them was the reduction in screening labor and costs, allowed them to give, they would only get a fraction of the yield through. A lot of the wet, fine particles would stick to the wood chips and very little would pass through the screen. It allowed them to have more compost ready for sale. And talking to Jake Catlin this fall, they have a lot more space for material handling because they're able to move it out of that building and into where they do final storage. There is an additional final report we did for some of the funders associated with that project, the biggest of them being the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, but also the Massachusetts Farm Energy Program. So there's more information out there if people are interested. Winding down here, just wanted to say that there's other similar systems in other northeastern states from Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and New York. here's a list of them, and I can share more information, and some information is on these sites on these facilities at our website. And then lastly, here's my contact information and a picture of an installation we're actively on now in northeastern Vermont, straight up Route 91 from Connecticut. So if you ever want Burke Mountain in the background is where a lot of folks go mountain biking. So and this is one of the most scenic compost sites that I get to work with. So, certainly similar application to what the Collins did with some minor tweaks. And I can take questions for there, or we hold them to the end. You're muted, Cynthia.
Brian, thank you so much for those case studies. It's really interesting to see how it all comes together with the materials that go into it. Very interesting. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
I have just one question in the chat box, which I will hold until we hear the next speaker, and then I will ask that. So the next speaker is Dr. Candice Bagnier, who is a former research biochemist, family therapist, and clinical psychologist. And she has also bred and trained horses and riders for over 45 years. Out of her training in body work, Dr. Bagnier developed a technique called aware riding, which encourages riders to be aware of their own bodies as well as their horses. She has served for over 26 years on the board of directors of Fairfield County Farm Bureau and as its president for 6 years. She also serves as a director of the Connecticut Farm Bureau and is now in her 3rd term in that position. Dr. Bagnier is the U.S. Pony Club Center Administrator at Whimsy Brook Farm. Welcome, Dr. Bagnier. Thank you.
Dr. Bagnier, you are muted and you need to share your screen.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so I have to say that our situation is infinitely simpler than the technologically advanced situations of the 2 or 3 former presenters. We have had a horse farm for about 50 years. And, you know, in the horse industry, it's most often to have large dumpsters, and you fill those up with your manure and you pay a lot of money to have it carted away. Instead, we decided to compost our manure. And so we'd been composting it for a very long time. This is kind of where we started. We were very poor, the little homies stuff, but I was a 4-H'er. My husband is a veterinarian, but he worked on dairy farms and apple orchards and all that kind of stuff. So he was familiar with tractors. I was familiar with composting, and we kind of like put it all together. But for years, we worked our entire farm with a 1955 Farmall Cub with a plow and a dump cart. So some years later, the family grew a little larger. This is my husband, myself, my son, my daughter, and the 2 grandkids, which are much older now. And our barn grew to now actually 2 barns with 12 stalls and some sheds and more horses and whatnot. And so come along Mr. Wedeman, who I've known for a long time. And I forget what exactly project we were working on, but he suggested that with the help of our sanitary person in town that we build a compost facility. And so we thought about that. We'd always composted, as I said, and we have a little spreader here, which works on our little farm. We're only 6.4 acres. But we never spread it raw because, of course, if you spread it raw, you're spreading worms all over your farm, which reinfest the horses. And also the wood fiber in the bedding will abstract nitrogen out of your soil. So you're kind of unfertilizing your land instead of fertilizing it. But in 2008, with a cost sharing plan, we built the first DEEP approved uncovered horse manure compost facility in the state of Connecticut, half of which is underground. It was, thank God for cost sharing because it was a $70,000 project. But basically our entire farm is on a hill. We're not near any big water courses, but we are on a hill. This thing was built into the hill, as was our previous manure pit. And we used big blocks for that. The floor of the facility is asphalt. And it was sized to accommodate the horses in 12 stalls and our 2 run-in sheds, which run about 18 to 20 horses. So it's a little bigger than that 6-horse operation. The facility has 4 bays, 3 for composting and 1 for excess storage. The bays are 5 foot 6 inches high by 14 feet wide by 30 feet long. And they hold 3 months of manure and bedding material. And when one bay is full, we move it to the next bay. They were sized to accommodate the bucket of our largest tractor so that we can work in and out of it easily. And that has a 6 foot wide bucket. It's a New Holland 45. And the outer walls of within the outer walls of the facility, and the block goes down a whole block underground. And basically there is a membrane, and then there is a 1.25 foot of crushed stone, and then a second membrane, and then 3 inches of stone dust, and over that is asphalt. And the asphalt floor extends 20 feet beyond the block to provide a working platform. And then around the outside of the block is a curtain drain to divert groundwater from entering the facility. And in front of it, there is a stone berm. What goes into the compost, our stall are a little different from the other farm because some of our horses have boreum shoes on their feet in the wintertime. So stall cushions would not work because they get torn up. We have asphalt floors with rubber mats, and we put about 4 inches of pelleted bedding in there. We add about a bag of pellets every 2 to 3 days, and we go through about 1.5 to 2 50-bag pallets a month. And this translates to about 30 cubic yards of hydrated bedding plus manure a month. What we do is we spread the fresh pellets at the back of the stall, and then we spray them with water to fluff them up, and then we mix them with the bedding that's already in the stall. Our sacrifice areas, and our horses are turned out all day, every day, unless the weather is inclement, are covered in stone dust. They're picked up every day. This manure has no bedding in it, and we don't pick up the manure in our pastures. So basically we have going into the compost facility is straight manure from the sacrifice areas and manure with pelleted bedding mixed with it. I was asked the question as to why pellets and not shavings, and for years we use shavings. You can see from the picture that pellet bedding takes up about 1/3 of the room storage-wise is the shavings, and we found out that it composts a lot faster. just because the wood particles are smaller. And the pellet bedding and the shavings cost about the same. So some years ago, we changed over to pelleted bedding, which I believe is what the 6-horse farm was also using. So this is our new compost facility. This is our New Holland 45, and you can see the steam coming off the bucket. This stuff does cook at around, it's strictly passive composting. It cooks at about 160 degrees in this first bay. As you can see, it's uncovered here, and we never cover the first bay because the bedding itself is like a sponge, and it requires a lot of rainwater to keep it moist enough so that it works. Here you can see the asphalt pad in front of the blocks. That's the working area. Beyond that is a gravel drive. Beyond that is this stone berm. And under the stone berm, there is a 4-foot deep and 6-foot wide trench filled with stone to catch any manure runoff that might come off the pile. Now, the first bay, nothing ever comes off of that because it just soaks up the water. We have a well, and actually we have 2 wells. There's just no way we could possibly add enough water to that and not run out of water on the farm. So the rain is really important. As I said, the compost is hot. It needs the water to make it work. And we also have a little place in New Mexico, and we gave up trying to compost there because there's not enough rainfall. And unless we watered the compost with very expensive water, nothing happened. We were just trying to compost our, prunings and whatnot from around our little place there. And it really taught us that compost really needs the water to work. As you've heard from the other 2 presenters, compost also needs oxygen to fuel its process. We use a passive composting method, and the middle of the pile is only reoxygenated when we move it from one bay to the next. This seems to work fine. Our bays, it takes about 3 months in each bay as we move it from bay to bay. And by the time it gets to the 3rd bay, we're actually selling it. If we covered the pile in the first bay, it could also spontaneously combust. We have colleagues who have had that problem. And let me tell you, when your compost catches on fire, it's not a nice thing at all. And it's really difficult to put out. And if you cover it, it can breed anaerobic bacteria, and then it would start to stink. Otherwise, horse manure is marvelously unsmelly. When we get to the 2nd bay, however, we do put compost fleece on top of it. Compost fleece is a particular fabric that's made specially for composting. It's kind of furry on the underside and smooth on the top side. It allows air to pass through it, but it sheds the majority of water. So as the piles start to cool down, as they're moved from bay to bay, it keeps the compost moist, but not too moist. And it provides a really nice product by the time we get to the 3rd bay. Fly control around horse farms is really important. And we are practically fly free. We've used fly predators, which are a tiny little wasp that lays their eggs in the larvae of the fly. We've used them for years, and we supplement that with fly traps. So you can work around our horse farm in shorts, no problem. And our neighbors who have grown up around us, and when we started, our farm was surrounded by alfalfa and cornfields, and now our farm is surrounded by McMansions. So being fly-free, needless to say, makes us a good neighbor. And if we weren't, we would have big problems. We also are able to sell this stuff, as I mentioned. And so this is a pile of the stuff from the third bay. And we use it on our own vegetable garden. The earthworms quickly discover it. And by the time half of that bay is sold, the third bay is sold, it already has earthworms in it. So the people that purchase our compost are very happy with that. And we even have some left in our fourth bay that we call worm post because it's really replete with earthworms. We sell it by the yard. If people come with their Homer buckets, as somebody is coming over the weekend, we give it to them for free because we encourage everybody to have gardens in their backyard. Otherwise, we have somebody that will deliver it. If you bring your pickup, we'll load your pickup. The stuff is really nice. It's pH neutral, and it's a tremendous soil texturizer as well as a soil nutrient. So we've been in operation for actually almost half a century. This is our 49th year. Next year will be our 50th. And so we use the compost on our own pastures, our vegetable gardens, and our plantings. This is an aerial picture of the farm a few years ago, and you can see the brown part on the green grass is because we had just spread the pastures. We only spread them during the growing season, and we usually spread them in the spring after we've mowed them and before we turn the horses out, and then we spread them again in the fall while everything is still growing. Down here in the front is our very large raised bed vegetable garden. We teach people how to do raised beds, and on our website, we have a little tab called Seeds of Change. And we have short little pieces about how to do all kinds of various things in growing vegetables and flowers. Basically, our farm is somewhat of a meditation. We like to keep it that way. It's planted kind of like a nursery, and people come and to relax and enjoy it. We teach a lot of students who have sensory processing disorder, anxiety disorders, ADHD, high functioning autism, as well as people that just want to learn about horse science and want to learn really well. We teach French school dressage and Western pleasure and hunter, and we have a pony club. So we like to think of ourselves as a good neighbor in town, and we are sadly the last farmed portion of a huge dairy farm that went up and down our road that was like about 500 or 600 acres, but we are all that's left, and we hope to keep doing it for a very long while. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Candace. That was really interesting. I'm thrilled to learn about compost fleece. I had never heard about that before, and lots of other things that you're doing. Thank you very much. Before we go on to our last speaker of the afternoon, I do want to just ask this question, which I believe is for Joe Wetterman. The question is, how large does an on-farm composting operation have to be to need a permit? Joe, if you're still with us, oh, there you are. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's going to depend. You know, if you're composting 20, 40 yards a year of horse manure and it's a high and dry area, and you're not having any problems, you really don't need to come to us to get an approval. But if you're composting that same amount of manure and your local town wants you to have an approval because it's a new farm, then we can help you get an approval, so we can accommodate that. And also the source materials make a difference. If you're composting food waste, and chicken manure, that could be very odoriferous and have a higher nitrogen content. So you need to be careful that you don't create a discharge, even if it is a small composting facility, and you create a discharge, you could end up having to get a permit from us. But if you have any questions about whether the size of your facility needs to be approved through us, give me a call and we can discuss it.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe, for that. Remember, everybody, you can put your questions in the chat box, and we will have a question and answer session after the next presentation. And our next speaker is Michael Carignan, who is the Director of Sales at AgriSource Inc. And he is an experienced field representative working on whole cycles of options for organic wastes. AgriSource finds a use for all types of organic residuals, from land application to composting to energy production. Since 1984, AgriSource has been a leader in the Northeast US in this field. So welcome to you, Michael, and it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. If you could just give me the heads up in the chat, just wondering how many people are planning on selling some of their compost that they're producing. As we get towards the end of the presentation, I can speed up or slow down to talk about some compost markets or just more on compost. So I'll talk a little bit about AgriSource quick, and then Cynthia, I'll just ask you if you can give me a heads up on what you think the majority is looking for. So thank you for the introduction. As Cynthia said, I'm Director of Sales at AgriSource Inc. We are based out of Rowley, Massachusetts, and have been providing organic waste management services since 1984. We do run a regional compost facility in Ipswich, Massachusetts, where we compost both municipal biosolids, and we do leaf and yard waste and food waste composting. It's a 10-acre site. We also run a soil blending facility in Middleborough, Massachusetts, where we do engineered soils for large-scale construction projects. We also do compost marketing services for municipal and private facilities. In Connecticut, we are the marketing arm out of Fairfield, Connecticut, for their municipal biosolid compost material. Cynthia, do you see any responses on which way people are leaning?
No, nobody has indicated anything in the chat box so far.
Okay. Not a problem.
I'll let you know if anything does come in.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go a little further. So we're going to be talking about compost, the compost process, possibly some markets a little bit today. So compost first, the compost process. Composting is the process of recycling organic residuals into usable and valuable products, which is the compost itself. And compost is a soil amendment with varied uses and values. So we're going to break it down a little bit and see what compost is. The definition from the U.S. Compost Council says that compost is the product manufactured through the controlled aerobic biological decomposition of biodegradable materials. The product has undergone mesophilic and thermophilic temperatures, which significantly reduces the viability of pathogens and weed seeds and stabilizes the carbon such that it's beneficial to plant growth. Compost is typically used as a soil amendment, but may also contribute plant nutrients. It's a lot in there, so I'd like to break it down a little bit, more digestible terms. So compost, the product manufactured through the controlled aerobic meaning with oxygen, biological decomposition of biodegradable materials. So that's the organic matter that we're looking at: leaves, grass, food scraps, manures. Product has undergone mesophilic and thermophilic temperatures, so it's hot enough but not too hot for the correct microorganisms or bugs to do the work they need to do, which significantly reduces the viability of pathogens and weed seeds and stabilizes carbon such that it's beneficial to plant growth. It makes it safe for us to use on our crops, fields, turf grass. Compost is typically used as a soil amendment, but may also contribute plant nutrients. So it's similar to a fertilizer, but it's not technically a fertilizer. make it easy, I like to break it down and just say our definition of compost is the product of decomposed organic matter, which has gone through proper time and temperature intervals, creating a soil amendment which aids in the benefit of plant growth. When we're talking about compost, it's different terminology that we've heard already today and that we'll get into a little bit further as well. But a few key phrases, feedstocks. So your feedstock is going to be your base material for the compost. What are you composting? Are you composting manures? Are you composting food wastes? What is that feedstock material? Then you have your bulking agent or your amendment. So typically that's the carbon source, which aids in the beginning of your carbon to nitrogen CN ratio. So CN is your carbon to nitrogen ratio. You can kind of look at it as your browns versus your greens, your wood versus your food, your wood versus your manures. You need to start out with a high CN ratio to have that balance down together. As we've heard before, you might have nitrogen fixation where carbon and nitrogen are pulling towards each other. Once you get to a balanced point, CN, somewhere in a 10-to-1 to 20-to-1 ratio, that's when you're going to be balanced and nitrogen can then be used by the plants. We also talk a lot about organic matter. So organic matter is the undecomposed residuals, active and dead microbes, or the biomass, and the product of decomposition. These are the materials that are burned off and placed in an oven at 450 degrees Celsius, or also known as loss of ignition. So physically, take a sample, goes into an oven at 450 degrees. Everything that gets burned off is considered organic matter. Anything that's left is the non-organic fraction, which would be your ash, your grit, sand, clay, inerts being, you can have plastic, glass, other materials in there. So everything that's burned off, say you start with 100 grams of material, 50 grams gets burnt off, 50 grams remains, you'd have 50% organic matter, 50% non-organic fraction. That's how that value's found. Then you also have lots of nutrients in compost. So you have macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. You have micronutrients like boron, calcium, iron, manganese, magnesium, zinc, nickel, a whole host of nutrients. So we're looking at feedstocks and amendments. You can see different feedstocks could be leaf and yard waste, food wastes, biosolids, manures, and you have other amendments such as wood grindings, brush, wood chips, sawdust, cardboard, something high carbon based can all be used as an amendment. So why are we composting? We're trying to make something that we have available already easier to use. We want to reduce any pathogens that could be in there. We want to eliminate any weed seeds that are also possible to be. And we're looking to convert organic matter to a more stable form. We've heard a few instances where we're worried about odors. You want to reduce your odors by composting. You want to reduce the potential for regrowth of pathogens. And again, you want to reduce your nitrogen immobilization by narrowing down that carbon to nitrogen ratio. Oops, excuse me. When we're looking at organic matter, again, it's the amount that is burned off when put into an oven. So the organic matter plus the ash or whatever is left over equals 100% of what the material is. You'll also sometimes hear people refer to organic carbon. And organic carbon is a portion of total organic matter. We use a set number, a set value for this. Typically, it's 54% of organic matter is considered organic carbon. And that's the number, that's used to work on your CN ratio. Also, another way to think of it is we hear a lot about carbon capture now. How much carbon can we take from the atmosphere from different materials and catch into the soil, catch into the compost? Well, we're trying to figure out how much carbon is actually in that compost. 54% of the organic matter itself is considered organic carbon. So the composting process. It's a process of converting and recycling wastes. So we've heard these temperatures kind of brought up a little bit already. We're looking for the temperatures that are going to favor thermophilic microbes. So somewhere in the range of 35 to 65 degrees Celsius. That's about 105 to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. those temperatures are adequate to kill pathogens and destroy weed seeds. You want to be 55 degrees Celsius minimum for 3 straight days. So that right there is long enough to kill any pathogens and weed seeds that could be in the compost. You want your temperatures to be high, but not too high, because once you get above that 165, you start changing off of that thermophilic microbes, which are the ones that are doing the work. You also want to make sure it's not too high or too dry to start generating fires like we heard about earlier. Again, composting is under aerobic conditions, so you need oxygen to be actively composting. And it's a controlled process. We're controlling what's happening during this process. We've probably all seen this somewhere, might have this somewhere around, put out back plenty of times, have people come to me and be like, hey, I got a great pile of compost, come take a look at it. And you come back there and it's just a pile of stuff sitting there, decaying, not composting, because it's not active. They're not adding oxygen to it. They're just leaving it alone, letting it sit into a pile. Not unusual to go into something where dig in, been sitting there for 10 years. I can pull out a full leaf and know exactly what kind of tree it came from because it's still in its full shape. There's been no work done to that pile. It's all the oxygen's been taken out of it. It's matted down, it's compact, no life left in there. So something like this is not composting. So we do something with a process control. So we're trying to control the temperatures, trying to cool down piles. And we're doing that by providing oxygen and introducing air to the system. So a couple of different ways which we've heard about, and we'll talk a little bit more about, are physically turning piles, and then also aerating piles by forced aeration using blowers. AgriSource is a commercial composters, but we do use each different type of method that's on here. So you can do windrow method, which is the simplest way to compost, but it gives you the least control and it takes up the most amount of space. We've seen a few examples of aerated static piles, which is a great way to do it. You do have more control over how much oxygen air you're adding to the system, but it does take some more equipment and a little more training. Lastly is an in-vessel system. We're not really going to talk about this because it's not much for a farm facility, but something to know about. So it's typically a mechanized process and you have the most control over it. It's done indoors where there is blower systems and thermocouplers, and we'll get into it a little bit in a minute. So a few examples of the composting styles. So we see up here, this would be your windrow composting. Just looking at the rows themselves, you can tell just by kind of debris and color, this looks like the freshest row that they've just built. And then they would get picked up, flipped. You can tell the rows are getting a little bit smaller, a little bit darker as they go down. So this is your typical windrow composting. This is also windrow composting, but it's using compost turner. So basically a big auger on the inside that's gonna run over the piles, churn it all up, beat everything up, make sure it's mixed nice and well. You do need a very large land area for this. Since the compost turner has an opening that's a certain size, 8 feet by 8 feet, you can only build your piles so large. Whereas if you're using a front end loader, big enough equipment, you can build your piles a little taller, a little wider, and it won't take up quite as much space. Bottom right is a picture from our Ipswich facility. These are some static aerated piles. So underneath these small windrows, there are perforated pipe that's recessed into the ground. We do have the blowers running on these constantly since we are composting biosolids in this area. We actually started off here where the material gets mixed up by this affectionately named brown house. Material gets moved inside. It then, once the building is full, takes about 10 to 12 days. We have 2 covered buildings. You can see one back here, and there's one towards where the picture was taken from. Both of those have aeration systems underneath them. So material goes from the mixed, from the brown house to one of the covered buildings, from one of the covered buildings out onto the air rows in the middle, off of the air rows in the middle, down to a curing area to where we then windrow them for a couple of flips from there. Up on the top right is the in-vessel system. So I'll just touch upon that quick. These bays are filled with a mixed material. There are blowers system underneath the material. The walls have heat sensors in them, and there's rails on top of here where an auger sits. Once a day, the auger drops in, churns through to make sure everything's nicely mixed. The heat sensors are connected to computers to where once the temperature starts getting too high, so you start getting above that 160, 170 degree Fahrenheit range, the blowers are going to kick on, start cooling off the piles until they get to a manageable temperature. The blowers will be off again. There's also odor control in these systems, which you can kind of see out this way, where the air is pulled out and actually put through a biofilter system on the outside. So a little more extensive, but certainly a way that compost is being made. So in Ipswich, here's a little video, see if it'll work here. Yep, building windrows. See the front end loader will now ride up the front of the pile, lift it up nice and high, and drop it, trying to make sure everything is nice and loose, break up any bowls, make sure the material is getting mixed. Again, the middle of that pile is going to be the hottest at that 160, 170 degrees. You then want to make sure that the inside moves to the outside. The outside's a little bit cooler, gets moved to the inside, so that heats up as well. Again, so we're killing any weed seeds, any pathogens, anything in there that we're worried about. You can see the moisture plume coming off of it. Just another example. We have two machines working to move this middle windrow. Again, it's a little bit larger scale operation, but it can be, principles can be applied. Sorry about the blurriness on there. So we're talking about a static aerated system. We had some great slides earlier showing the systems that are being installed. Just a quick graphic of a similar schematic where you have your fan going into a perforated pipe that then your compost is sitting on top of. Similarly, you could do it with positive pressure where your air is being pushed out, or the negative pressure where it's actually having the suction. That way it would work better for your heat exchange. But a lot of times too, you can see if you're pulling through the pile, and you're looking for some kind of odor control, you can actually put the exhaust into a finished pile of compost to reduce some of the odor that way. Again, a couple pictures of some static aerated piles, similar undercover with blower systems. You can see the blowers in this area, and the piping goes down below. And just a quick in-vessel facility. I mentioned the biofilter for odor control. You can see that back in this corner. This is actually in Fairfield, Connecticut. The air is being pumped back out into this biofilter, so then the odor does not come off. And quick picture on the inside. These are fairly expensive facilities, so not something that we see all over the place. Blower fans that go under to go underneath the bays, exhaust to pull the air out. So we've heard a lot about these different terms, quick schematic of the whole compost process in general. So it says dewatered biosolids there. We can just call that the feedstock in this case. So feedstock being the manure or food waste, whichever we're looking at. So we're going to take our feedstock, we're going to take our bulking agent, which is our carbon source, our wood, our cardboard, our brush, and then we're going to start mixing the two together. Typically, we physically mix with a front end loader. That goes into our active composting area where there is aeration, either aeration physically by blowing air in through the pipes or by moving our compost down the windrows. We're adding oxygen. That's our active composting. From there, we go to curing, which is when the material starts cooling down and finishing, screening, and storage. So we get into a little bit more of these. So your bulking agent. What's your bulking agent really looking to do? You're trying to provide structure into your mix. You're trying to allow air to move through your compost. Since it's important to have air going through your compost, you need to set up your mixture that way. It's also a source of carbon, and it helps to absorb some excess moisture. If you have a really wet mix to begin with, you're going to add more and more of your bulking agent to balance it out. So we're talking about structure, we're talking about pore spaces. So you really want good pore spaces, and you want air filled pore spaces. If you look to the left-hand side, you have these areas, openings, you know, aggregates, you get your wood, you got your other material in here that leaves some openings so air can run through and go out. You're trying to exchange gases, you're trying to get moisture out, you're trying to make sure oxygen gets in. You need really good pore spaces. If you have poor pore spaces or not well structured mixture, these spaces are going to get filled in more and more. Darker areas, nowhere to go. Air is having a hard time getting out. You really only have a couple spaces. You're not feeding your microbes with oxygen. You're not releasing moisture. You can continue to have a slower breakdown of materials and a wetter overall compost. So what are our mixing goals? So typically we like to start our mixes with about 40% total solids. 60% of the mix would be moisture. Inversely, when you're finishing, you're going to be looking around the opposite. You're looking to have about 60% solids and 40% moisture. But when you're doing that, so say you have a feedstock, a manure that's around 20% solid, and you're looking for a bulking agent that's about 60% solid, you're going for about a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, 1-to-1 is on a weight basis. So say you have 1 ton of feedstock or 1 ton of manure, that 20% total solids. You're going to want to add 1 ton of a bulking agent. We know that leaves, when they're compacted, is around 5 yards of leaves is around 1 ton. So for us, when we're mixing and blending, you'll see maybe 1 ton of material, feedstock, to 5 yards of leaves. Just a quick example of when you're dealing with food waste, there's source separated food waste. You can have it dropped off, laid out, and you can see some of the bulking material back here or off here on the side, ground wood, some older compost, laying it out. Now trying to figure out, okay, what's our moisture content in this material? Vegetables, very high moisture content. So you really need to bump up that bulking agent, that amendment. We'll see it all the time. It's great to bring in food waste. It's great to compost food waste. It can just be very tricky to deal with. You need to add a high amount of bulking agent, which takes up a lot of space, or you need to add a lot of oxygen to the system. So we're talking about active composting. Aeration requirements depend on the rate of biodegradation. Active piles will have temperature gradients, meaning, like we said, you're going to be really hot in the middle of a pile, you're going to be a little cooler on the outside, and you'll also see it from bottom to top, especially if you're in a aerated pile. You'll see the temperatures changing from low to high as the air is pushing out, the heat is escaping at the top. You're going to have temperature gradients throughout that entire pile. So not unusual if you're taking temperatures with a temperature probe to see some variation throughout that pile, but you want to see some consistency per area that you're going into. The next step is curing. So follows the active composting stage, allows time for further degradation of materials. So curing may not require forced aeration as degradation rates are lower. During curing, temperatures may remain at thermophilic conditions. So above that 130 or so degrees, but it's starting to come down now. And curing may also be associated with further drying. So at this point, it's finishing off the compost. It's gone through its active stage. It's now starting to cool down and starting to dry off a little bit more. And you want it to dry off So you can get to the next stage, which is screening, if you are going to screen your material. So basically you're taking the large pieces and the bulking agents that remain intact after curing, and you're going to start removing them. We use large trommel screeners, which is a big drum that spins around. We can screen materials anywhere from 3/4 of an inch down to 1/4 of an inch. 1/4 of an inch can be a very, very slow process, but we do it for some applications. And the oversized pieces, or the screenings, tailings we call them, can be recycled and put back into the beginning of the mix. So down here on the chart, screening, you then can take your tailings or your unscreened material, put it back into this area, start using it as your bulking agent again. You can reuse those tailings several times. It does get to a point where that wood that's being put in there becomes totally saturated, makes it difficult to have benefits as far as moisture grabbing, but it does still help in that porosity, does still help in that physical structure of the compost mix that you're creating. And you can screen the compost prior to screening, prior to curing, excuse me, or you can cure it first. Either which way, not an issue with screening. Once you screen it, you have to store the material. So it's required to account for the variability in demand. We see a high demand in compost in spring and fall, at typical seasons. So summertime, wintertime, you have to have good storage, try and make sure your material stays dry and marketable and usable for yourself. In these areas, you should protect it from runoff and rain as much as possible. And you should always allow for the oldest material to be removed first. So when you're planning out an area to do composting, always best to think about, where am I going to start? Do my mixing? Where am I going to windrow or have it on an static pile? And where am I going to physically be screening the material? You always want to be working towards that screening plant, and then you want to be able to store it in an area that you can easily access the oldest material first. So it's a whole system, having it in place where you're working most efficiently to use your time throughout the process. So there are some regulatory requirements that we have to follow to be a Class A product or for unrestricted use. As we talked about with both in-vessel and aerated static piles, you need to keep temperatures over 55 degrees Celsius for at least 3 continuous days. That's in order to kill any weed seeds or pathogens. If you're windrow composting, temperatures must be above 55 degrees C for 15 days. And during that period of time, you need to turn your piles 5 times. Another part of this requirement is vector attraction reduction. Basically, when you're aerobic composting, for the next 14 days throughout the life cycle of the composting, you need to have all your temperatures need to be recorded above 40 degrees Celsius. You need to have an average of 45 degrees Celsius during that time. 14 days. It's not like the initial 55 degrees C at 3 days where it has to be 3 consecutive days. It just needs to be 14 days during the remaining lifetime of the compost. So if you're you hit those temperatures for 7 days in a row, you've now flipped your pile. Obviously the piles cool down, they're going to heat back up, and another 7 days after that, you're at those temperatures again. You've completed your 14 days at that. So not all composts are the same. We all have different feedstocks. We have different ways of processing them. We'll end up seeing some variability with pH, nutrients, organic matter. We see all different types of changes between different types of compost. So for making compost, we should know the benefits of it. So different areas. We're going to talk a little bit about physical properties and chemical properties. So basically, we're looking to improve our soil by using compost and adding organic matter. So we're going to increase water holding capacity. Compost can hold over 3 times its weight in water. If you change the organic matter percentage in your soil by 1%. So 1% increase of organic matter in your soil can hold 25,000 gallons of water at a 6-inch depth over an acre. So 6 inches deep, 1 acre of area, 25,000 gallon increased water holding capacity by increasing organic matter by 1%. You're also improving your physical structure of soil with soil pore spaces. So using organic matter in a soil mixture, if you're very compact and tight, heavy clay soil, you have some organic pieces that are fitting into there. As that organic matter continues to break down, it's going to leave a little pore space behind. That pore space behind is going to be great for water movement, root can move into it, air exchange, oxygen exchange can all happen in that pore space. So compost is going to help with that physical structure of a soil as well. And it'll help lower the bulk density. If you think about a typical loam, sandy loam, somewhere in the range of 1,800 pounds per cubic yard, where a compost, a higher wood-based compost could be somewhere in the 800 to 1,000 pounds per cubic yard. Leaf and food waste compost could be somewhere in the 1,200 pounds, per cubic yard range. So adding physically that lighter material to the heavier one, it's going to overall make the soil lighter, make it fluffier, reduce some of the compaction, make it a more beneficial soil for use. So because of all those things we just talked about, you can reduce water use for irrigation, you can improve infiltration into the soil surface, and you can reduce erosion and runoff. On a nutrient side or a chemical side, compost is going to increase your cation exchange capacity, so the ability to hold nutrients in soil. It also provides nutrients in an organic and slow release form, which helps you reduce the use of synthetic fertilizers if you're spreading it out on your farm, or if you're selling it to other people in order to spread on their lawns or use for plantings. They can help reduce their use of synthetic fertilizer by using the compost we're producing. So because of that, we're going to improve our nutrient availability. We're going to decrease the loss of nutrients due to leaching because we're going to be holding them tighter in the soil with that increased cation exchange capacity. And we're going to improve overall plant growth and survival. So compost is alive. It is a living thing. There are microbial populations that continue to grow and decompose the organic matter that's in the compost. Activity declines, but it doesn't quite stop. Thermophilic microbes will be replaced by mesophilic microbes when compost cools and when compost is added to soil. So mesophilic microbes that can colonize compost can be antagonistic to plant pathogens. So we can see benefits of using compost in soil mixtures to prevent some plant pathogens. And the addition of compost to soil stimulates the activity of existing microbes in the soil. So not only are we adding microorganisms into the soil that are beneficial, but they can actually stimulate what's already existing in the soil. So what about these bugs? We don't get too far into it, but they contain a diverse communities of different microorganisms. The quality of the organic matter and environmental conditions in the soil will determine which microbes grow and survive. The populations in the soils can be so large that because we're adding in compost and adding in our own populations, just the sheer numbers that currently exist in the soil, it's hard to change the full diversity, but it does spike the growth of what's existing in that soil. So benefits of using compost to improve soil, physical, and biochemical are significant enough to justify using compost. Just look quickly at a test report. So if you are testing your compost, great to know how to read a compost test report. We do a lot of our testing through Penn State. Since we are based out of Massachusetts, we used to use UMass quite a bit to do our testing with, and they no longer are testing compost, so we send our materials to Penn State. So when we're looking at these, what are we really looking for? People are always curious about what's my pH? Where's my bulk density? How much organic matter is in there? And it's good to know what's my carbon to nitrogen ratio at. So pH should mostly be around neutral. We're a little high here at 7.6. Bulk density, so this is a leaf and yard waste compost. 1,268 pounds per cubic yard. Organic matter, we're always looking in this far right area, results on a dry weight basis. So 36%. Typically, we'll see a leaf and yard waste compost in that 30 to 40% range. You can see manures and biosolids upwards of 50% organic matter. So they do have higher organic matter and typically a higher nutrient content as well. And when we're looking at the CN ratio, you typically want to see between 10 and 20 to 1. This one's coming in around 17, so 17 to 1. And then as we go down the line, you'll start to see all the a couple of micro and macronutrients, and then all the micronutrients that are listed there. Again, you can go off this middle column. You can figure out how much phosphorus am I putting out if I'm putting out 1 pound, or if I'm putting out 1 cubic yard of 1 cubic yard of compost over 1,000 square feet. Well, you're applying 2.86 pounds of phosphorus, and not all that phosphorus is water soluble, water extractable, but it's a high nutrient load to begin with. So quick thing just to look at when you're seeing, if you're testing your compost, a couple areas to keen into and look at. How are we doing? So another thing is, when's compost done? When's it stable? When's it mature? So we're looking at our CN ratio, less than 15. So in that 10 to 20 to 1 indicates a compost that will not result in nitrogen immobilization. So again, we're worried about stealing or robbing nitrogen from a soil. We want to feed the soil. That's why we're adding the compost. Microbial respiration. So it's a measurement of CO2 under controlled conditions, which can indicate the presence of organic matter. Self-heating, quick and easy way to figure out if compost is still going, still active. Pick it up and see if it's hot to the touch. You'll know that if it's really, really hot, you're still very active in your compost phase. It starts to cool down. It's starting to become more stable and more mature. And then there's different plant growth tests where it can measure the effects of compost on germination and the vigor of the plant altogether. A couple of quick tests on that. We also run, which would be a cucumber bioassay. So taking compost and a soil mixture, a heavy compost mixture, we'll use cucumber in the test. Cucumber is a very sensitive plant that needs very stable material to grow successfully in. So physically do a couple little plantings with cucumber seeds, sit, watch it grow. We're looking for the emergence and we're looking for the seedling vigor. So on this particular test, 96.67% emergence. If we go over to the interpretation, emergence over 90% is considered very mature. Seedling vigor 100%. So if we have any seedling vigor over 95%, also considered very mature. You'll see different bioassays used for different materials. Certain clovers are very susceptible to pesticides. So you can see that used to determine if there's anything in the compost or any other kind of material to be growing into. Another way is called a Solvita test. So a Solvita test, they're basically looking for your CO2 respiration and nitrate respiration. So it's a small test where a jar is taken, compost is put into it, a small stick is inserted into that, and it's capped off, put on a table, sits there for a day. That stick changes color to measure how much CO2, how much NH3 is coming off of the compost while it's sitting in there. The thought being, if it's respiring too much, it's still active, there's still things going on, therefore it's not quite a finished compost. There's a number system that's associated with it. So 6, even though it says active compost, if you read the bottom here, Solvita maturity rating of 6 equals curing. So aeration requirements reduced, compost is ready for piling. It's reduced to management requirements. You can take it off of blowers. It's pretty much ready to go. A Solvita of 6 and above is commonly recognized as suitable maturity for official uses. Let's get a few more minutes. Just run through a few compost uses. So if you're using it yourself, or if you're looking to sell some of your compost outside of the farm, there's different areas and markets you can focus on and try and sell to. So we do all different types of things at AgriSource in different areas that we try and market to. We sell to golf courses. You get some home gardeners, filter sock materials. You can use it as a mulch and different engineered soils. We'll go past here. One of the big things that we've seen a huge uptick on is top dressing of lawns. Now it does require a lot finer of a material. Screen, that's why we screen some materials down 1/4 inch. They want it to fall into the leaf blade and down, but a lot of homeowners are looking for this service, and it's a great way to move some of the material offsite if you're looking for it. One way you'll see is landscapers using bark blowers. Ooh, sorry if that's loud. Using bark blowers to apply the compost gives them a way to kind of evenly spread this top dressed over the lawn. We also see golf courses using it with their type of equipment, where they can do rough areas to thicken up, amend the soil. Sports fields as well, the different markets that are looking for this as they try and use more organic materials, more natural materials. They're trying to get away from as much synthetic fertilizers as they can, still manage their properties within a way that's acceptable to their clientele and can perform in a way that they want it to. Compost can be used in those environments, and we've really been trying to let people know that and help them see that they can use these methods in their processes. Or when all else fails, you can just put it in the wheelbarrow, shovel it up, fling it out there, flip your rake over, and back rake it in. As we said, compost isn't quite a fertilizer. You don't have to worry about it striping like a traditional fertilizer would. You can lay it out. It doesn't have to be perfect application. Just getting it out there, amending the soil, really helping what you're going to be doing. I think we will hold off there. I'll just run through this last one. So if top dressing is something people are interested in, or you do have an outlet for it, typically we like to just let people know the proper application rates that they're going to be using it in. Really only want to go about 1/4 to 1/3 of an inch thickness, which is about 3/4 to 1 cubic yard per 1,000 square feet. Or that equates to about 30 to 40 cubic yards per acre. So when you're doing that, you're applying about 1/2 to 1 pound per 1,000 square feet of nitrogen in a slow release form over the first growing year. So 10% of that is soluble. So some of the nutrients in compost are readily available. Usually around 10% of them are soluble. They will, after a rain or an irrigation cycle, they will release from the compost. So you do see a nice green up. You do get that active growing right out the beginning, which is great for landscape and homeowners because they're seeing the effects right away. But in reality, what we're trying to do is build the soil. We're trying to build what's going on underneath. Like anything else in life, if you have good roots and a good base, everything else is going to be solid going forward. So really what we're trying to do with these types of applications and compost in general is build a better soil, build better roots for people to be more successful on the top growth. More is not always better. There is soluble nutrients in there. You do have to worry about a temperature sometimes because they are typically dark in color. Sunlight can be pulling it in, and you could simply just smother what you're trying to put your materials on. So with a lot of people who don't have experience, say if a little's good, a lot must be better. Not the case when we're using compost in these types of situations. So with that, I will wrap that up. Is my contact information on there, any kind of social platforms. If anybody has any questions, you can feel free to put it in the chat box, and happy to answer them. And thank you for the opportunity today.
Well, Michael, thank you. That was probably one of the most complete presentations about compost that I've experienced, and had a lot of technical information in it. And I want people to remember that this is recorded, the whole webinar is recorded, and Chelsea has put the link to the recording in the chat box. And of course, you can access the other events that we've had over the past couple of months as well. The 5 webinars will be available at this link that she's put there. So there are some questions. There's quite a lot for you, Michael, but I'm going to go back a little bit. There is a question, I think this will be a quick one, for Candice about a source where people can buy the compost fleece. If you have that information, that would be good. Just a quickie, or you could put it in the chat box if you want. I'm not sure if you are going to answer that verbally. You're muted. Oh, now you're not muted. Thank you.
Hi. I'm going to have to search around my computer.
Okay, so maybe in the interest.
It lasts for quite a while. I think this last load I've had for about 3 years now. You do have to be kind of, you don't want to walk on it. So you have to be kind of careful. It's pretty tough stuff, but you want to take care of it. It's pretty expensive. But I have to walk around my computer to find out exactly where I bought this last one. I have used Compostex, however.
Okay.
So I'm going to
ask you to put that information when you find it in the chat box. We have quite a lot of questions here. I'd like to give people a chance to hear the answers to, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. So the next question is from Dawn, and she's asking, are the moisture contents of the feedstocks measured or derived from tables? And I believe this was for you, Michael.
Sure, we know the moisture content in different residuals that we handle, as far as food processing residuals or manures and biosolids. Those are all measured materials. As far as produce, things like that, we use a base number off of a table for that type of. So if you are using your manures, you can have it tested and get a moisture content and solids content on there to use that to do your mixing off of.
Okay, thank you. Another question here about the scale, or I guess this is really, is there a threshold size that you feel would be recommended for a profitable composting operation? How to determine what size of an operation you need in order to have a business, profitable business?
Tough for me to say. We are commercial and wholesale, so we do go on a large scale where our compost isn't as expensive as someone who probably is producing less material. We do between creating and marketing over 100,000 yards a year of compost. So smaller scale, if you're doing 1,000 yards or 2,000 yards, really depends on what the market is in your area, what you can get for it. I've seen smaller farms selling compost anywhere in the 30 to 60 above dollars per yard range. So really it's starting to figure out what are your costs, how much does it cost you to do it, are you getting paid for materials on the way in, and what can you get for it on the way out, and determine what you need to make to do those things. So it's a little bit of a cost benefit analysis you have to create to make sure if it's going to be profitable for you or not.
Okay, thank you. Next question, does AgriSource work with gore covered systems? That's gore covered systems.
We do not. We don't use any coverings, just a couple of overhead areas. We don't use large scale covers on our compost.
Okay. The next question from Greg is, Michael, could you please clarify that part 503 concerns biosolids composting?
Yep, so part 503 is for biosolids composting to make sure that it can be regulated and distributed materials, but there are things in there that are beneficial for composting overall as far as the temperatures and timing that you want to try and hit while you're doing composting of pretty much any materials.
Okay. I seem to have lost the order here. Okay, let me just go back up here. I feel like I missed a couple of questions that came in, so just bear with me for a second. Okay, do you know what the cost of a compost test is at Penn State?
Yep, that can vary between what you're looking at. So just a basic test is going to be running around $75. If you want to get further information like bulk density, nitrate, if you want to go through the whole CO2 respiration bioassay, you can be upwards of $300 for the test. So 75 to 300, you're in that range, depending on what you're looking for.
Okay, thank you. And I did go back up and there was an earlier question, and this question is for Joe Wetterman. If you're still with us, Joe. Based on some of the case study examples, what is required for contact water management?
So I'm thinking they're asking, what do you need to do for precipitation that's come in contact with your compost and how you manage that. So a couple of the case studies we looked at, the one that Jim Hyde presented had a roof over it, and that's one way to address runoff is roofing your site. And some of the facilities that Michael showed and that Brian showed had roofs on them also. If you don't have a roof, depending upon the size of and what you're composting, what the source materials are, you know, it could be as simple as setbacks from surface waters and being able to infiltrate the small amount of runoff that you have. But for much larger facilities, if you're composting outdoors, you may have to be collecting that material and then dealing with it, or using composting fleeces to cover it so you minimize the runoff. So it's going to depend a lot on what the actual situation is.
Okay, great. So Dr. Beignet has put her supplier on the chat box, and it's CV Compost. So that would be www.cvcompost.com. Thank you very much, Candace, for putting that up. And I don't see any more questions, but if people want to reach out to Joe with permitting or other kinds of questions, his contact information is in the chat box. Okay. So I don't see any other questions coming in. Here's your last chance, people, for questions. Otherwise, I'm going to thank all our speakers. I found all the presentations to be very informative, and I'm looking forward to hopefully building on this series and having another statewide conference next year on the subject. And I'm only speaking for myself, not for the whole committee, but I think that this has shown us that there's a huge amount of interest in this topic. We've been very happy with the attendance and the interest in this series, especially with the difficult conditions this year and having to forego our live conference in the spring. I think it worked out really well. And thank you very much to Deep and the staff for hosting, providing the technical platform for this, and for all the work that Amanda Johnson Amanda Fargo Johnson from RC&D did to bring this committee together. Thank you very much. Okay, no other questions are coming. So
Yeah, there was one question.
really,
Yep,
where I don't see that.
I can read it out if you want.
Yeah, please do. I don't see it.
Dan Gallagher asked, does anyone use earthworms in their process?
Not on purpose.
Anybody make earthworms? Our process makes lots of earthworms. It is replete with earthworms. And actually, yeah, I mean, if you just dig around in there, it's just full of them. And it makes the gardeners around here very happy.
Likewise, our processes don't use earthworms. Mostly we'll see them when the material is stored either raw feedstocks or finished product on native soil, and worms tend to populate those areas. The one dedicated vermicomposting operation that I'm aware of in Vermont is Black Dirt Farm, so you can get vermicompost from them.
Yeah, similar. We, not on purpose that we're physically adding them to, but they do make their way to finished piles.
Hearing no other bids, I guess it's time to say good evening and goodbye. Oh, I'm trying to remember what the famous newscaster said, and I can't remember it. But anyway, thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.